Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's event, The Great Resignation and Long-Term Unemployment, hosted by AARP and the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. This is the third event in a series focused on the long-term unemployed, hosted by AARP and the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. As a reminder, today's event is being recorded, so we'll share this link with the recording after the event. My name is Rhett Buttle. I'm here today to serve as your moderator, and we have an amazing lineup of speakers today. We're going to hear from workforce development experts, industry representatives on the current state of the labor market and what is going on in the economy. We're also pleased to be joined by Michelle Chang, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy at the U.S. Department of Commerce. We then have a panel discussion that's focused on the Great Resignation and the long-term effects on unemployment. But first, I'm honored to introduce two amazing leaders and today's host for our conversation. Today, we'll be joined by Stuart Anderson, who's the Assistant Vice President and Director of the Center for Workforce and Economic Opportunity at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, and also Susan Weinstock, who's the Vice President of Financial Resilience Programming.
ARP is so pleased to be working with the Atlanta Fed and Public-Private Strategies to host our third event in a series on the long-term unemployed. Just this past Friday, the Bureau of Labor Statistics released their October jobs report. ARP has a public policy institute, and every month they analyze that data, looking at its impact on older workers. And the analysis actually unearths a couple of interesting and I thought relevant findings to this conversation. So in October, the percentage of job seekers aged 55 and older who were long-term unemployed declined actually to 41%, down from 49% in September, which is great news. However, what's interesting to note is that the labor force participation rate for the 55 and older actually decreased a bit in October from 38.4% from September's 38.6%. Obviously, we're living in a very interesting time with regard to the labor market, which is one of the reasons why I am so pleased that Michelle Chang, who is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy for the Economic Development Administration at the U.S. Department of Commerce, is joining us today. The EDA facilitates regional economic development efforts in communities across the nation and works directly with communities and regions to help them build the capacity for economic development based on local business conditions and needs, and provides economic development assistance, financial assistance to communities so they can encourage innovation and entrepreneurship in a way that works best for them. Michelle brings a wealth of experience in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors to the job. She most recently was the executive director of the Rework America Business Network at the Markle Foundation, where she worked with Fortune 500 companies to help American workers with four-year degrees get the skills they need and access quality jobs. Obviously, she is so well qualified for this position and to speak with us today, and we are thrilled to have her here with us. So Michelle, I will turn it over to you, and thank you.
It is great to be with you all, and I want to thank you all, AARP and the Federal Reserve Bank, for inviting me to speak. It is great to be with such an impressive group of workforce and talent development practitioners and policymakers, think tanks, researchers, and philanthropy, industry and business representatives. Thank you all for your participation, and thank you for the work that you all are doing to bring workers back into the labor force, to create new jobs and boost the quality of life for those in your communities. I'm pleased to be here today representing the U.S. Department of Commerce and the Economic Development Administration. I'm honored to be working for a president that is taking bold steps to address the inequities in our economy and provide relief to those who are struggling during the COVID-19 pandemic. We are committed to a whole of government approach to working with all of you to create a bright future for our nation and its workers. We understand that we are living in unprecedented times, and that is one of the reasons why we are experiencing labor shortages. Job hunting and hiring during a pandemic is certainly different, with a new calculus for workers. An in-person job could bring increased risk or take a parent away from a child who's completing virtual school. Workers are also dealing with a lopsided recovery, with industries like leisure and hospitality leading new hiring, as areas like education are still behind. A second major reason for the labor shortage is fear over health. A recent Census Bureau Household Pulse survey asked respondents why they're not working. Of those surveys from September 1st to September 13th, About 4.65 million said the main reason they aren't working is because they are caring for someone or sick or themselves sick with someone who is sick or themselves that have the coronavirus symptoms. In addition, workers today are also rethinking life and work. A lot of people are reimagining and rethinking what's next for them, hence the Great Resignation. While these drivers are having a tremendous impact, I am pleased to report that we are seeing steady signs of progress. Last week, it was announced that the economy added 531,000 jobs in October. On average, we've gained 442,000 jobs a month over the last 3 months. The number of jobs added in October came in above market expectations, partly reflecting an improvement in the public health situation. Job gains in August and September were revised up a combined 235,000. In addition, the unemployment rate fell by 0.2 percentage points to 4.6%, as labor force participation held steady and the employment rate reached a new pandemic recovery high. This marks the lowest unemployment rate we've seen since the pandemic began. While this is all very promising news, we know there is much more work that needs to be done to bring workers back, create the jobs of the future, and ensure our nation's future economic competitiveness. President Biden's Build Back Better agenda reflects a core belief that had motivated him to run for president. That is that we owe working people in this country a fair shot, and that we have to prepare them to compete, and that we owe them a level playing field on which to do that. For President Biden, that comes down to a simple proposition: dignity. It's about saying to hardworking Americans across the country that we have their back. We'll fight to ensure that the wealthiest and corporations pay their fair share so that working families, care workers, teachers, firefighters, and nurses get a chance. The Build Back Better agenda is about giving everyone that chance. 3 of the major components of that agenda are: 1, climate, tackling the climate crisis by creating good paying clean energy jobs; health, making healthcare more affordable; and 3, family, making caring for your family more affordable. The Build Back Better agenda is about the things that matter to people. Can I get a good job in my hometown? Can I go to sleep with a little more peace of mind? Can my kids get a good education and build an even better life for themselves? We can't put the promise of a middle-class life within reach of every American if we can't compete around the world. And we can't compete around the world so long as we neglect the resilience and capacity of our infrastructure, the education and health of our workforce, and the most American idea of all, the opportunity for every single person to get a fair shot. Our work must start with developing a skilled 21st century workforce. In order to maintain our competitive edge, we need to make smart investments in our people. At the Department of Commerce, our Secretary Gina Raimondo spent a lot of time assessing what it is that makes American businesses so competitive for decades, and what we need to maintain that competitive edge. The bottom line is, without smart investments, we risk losing our competitive edge. As the Secretary has often said, if workers have the courage to take the risk in getting trained for a new career, then we need to be able to provide them high quality, affordable training programs that lead to a good job. This is especially important for older workers who maybe took time off to take care of others and now may potentially find themselves without the skills needed for the jobs of today. Critically, the President's Build Back Better agenda includes bold and long overdue investments in workers that will create profits for businesses large and small. It supports training and apprenticeship programs that will provide millions of American workers the skills they need for the high quality jobs of tomorrow. Our current workforce challenges are not just about skills, though. We also need to prepare the next generation of workers and make it easier for parents to participate in the workforce. It's about giving all American workers an opportunity to participate in our economy in the first place. It's about universal PK for every 3 and 4-year-olds so parents can go to work and so children have the education that sets them up for success. It's about affordable childcare, elder care, and expanded paid leave so no one has to choose between caring for the family and a paycheck. Companies realize that providing these benefits to their employees is a competitive advantage. We need to realize as a country that providing these benefits puts us all at a competitive disadvantage. Oh, sorry, not providing these benefits puts us all at a competitive disadvantage. We need to scale these benefits for people who don't work at the world's largest companies. Every successful business makes investments because they know the best way to succeed is by investing in their people and their core functions. The same is true for government. It is simply irresponsible to not make these investments. We currently spend just 1/5 of the average that other advanced economies spend on workforce training programs. The United States is the only industrialized country that does not provide paid leave, and it's hurting our economy. Enabling American women to fully participate in our workforce would create enough economic growth to account for nearly half of the Buildback Better Act alone. As we get more jobs, we must ensure that Americans have the skills they need to get these jobs. Under President Biden's American Rescue Plan Act, the Economic Development Administration, where I serve as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy, was allocated an unprecedented $3 billion in supplemental funding. This funding is helping us assist communities nationwide in their efforts to build back better by accelerating the recovery from the pandemic and building local economies that will be resilient to future economic shocks. On July 22nd, Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo announced EDA's 6th American Rescue Plan funding opportunities. Our Good Jobs Challenge is EDA's premier workforce development initiative that allocates $500 million towards industry-led workforce training programs to help get Americans, particularly women, people of color, and those in underserved communities, get back to work in good paying jobs. The challenge is designed to help get Americans back to work by developing and strengthening regional workforce systems that support sectoral partnerships that will lead to high quality jobs. The goal of regional workforce training systems is to create and support effective training programs that will connect the in-demand and emerging skill needs of employers with qualified workers, and to help those workers find and keep quality jobs and advance along a chosen career path. This program is designed to get Americans back to work and increase wage growth, as well as develop in-demand driven systems that will continue to support Americans in securing and retaining quality jobs. Successful applicants of this program will include proactive employer engagement and mobilization, as well as secure employer commitments to hire. Other programs at EDA have supported workforce development in the past, but this is a focused investment on workforce development. It is imperative that economic and workforce developers work together to design a comprehensive strategy in workforce development for their region, in partnership with local labor, universities, community colleges, and employers. It is time to think about all of these pieces holistically and collaboratively, which is why we focus so much on system development building at EDA, and really encourage that in our Good Jobs Challenge applications. Without a strong workforce in place, any economic development strategy is destined to fail. The Good Jobs Challenge application deadline is January 26, 2022. We encourage you to visit eda.gov to find out more about that. Before I close, I'd like to note that at EDA, we recently revisited our investment priorities. These are the priorities that provide an overarching framework to ensure that our grant investment portfolio, ranging from planning to infrastructure construction, contributes to local efforts to build, improve, or better leverage economic assets that allow businesses to succeed and regional economies to prosper and become more resilient. Today, our top investment priority is equity, which speaks to our continued commitment to work closely with our nation's most underserved populations and communities. Working with these populations and communities has been our mission since President Johnson signed the Public Works and Economic Development Act, which authorized the creation of EDA in 1965. EDA's commitment to supporting strategies that advance workforce development, manufacturing, exports, and foreign direct investment strategies remains unwavering. Understanding that innovation is the backbone of our economy and that we must invest to grow the businesses for the future, including those that address climate change, EDA has also added technology-based economic development and environmentally sustainable development as priorities. And coal and power plant communities are specifically addressed under our recovery and resiliency priority. To close, again, I want to thank AARP and the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta for the invitation to speak to you all. By working together and sharing ideas and best practices in forums like this, we can best address and solve some of our nation's most pressing problems and get our nation back to work.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for patience and sorry for technical problems with the internet this afternoon. And hopefully all those things will be behind us soon. I also want to just jump in and say thanks to Michelle for the great remarks and conversation. I think that it'll be it'll lead into the discussion that we're about to get into, and I'd like to introduce our moderator and panel this afternoon. First, our moderator, Bill Rogers, who's the Vice President and Director for the Institute for Economic Equity at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. Before that, Bill was a professor of public policy and the chief economist at the Heldrich Center for Workforce Development at Rutgers. He's studied a range of labor market issues and connected them to workforce development. So he'll be a wonderful lead for our conversation today. Bill's joined by a bunch of all-stars. First, Ed Ege, who's the Vice President for Government Relations and Workforce Development at the National Retail Federation. He's responsible for NRF's policies on labor, employment, immigration, healthcare, and workforce development. Maria Heidkamp, who's the Director of Program Development at the Heldrich Center for Workforce Development at Rutgers. She's been at Rutgers at the Heldrich Center since 2006, where she's focused on issues relating to dislocated workers and the long-term unemployed. In 2015, she was instrumental and led the launch of the New Start Career Network, which has served over 6,000 older long-term unemployed New Jerseyans. We're also joined by Chad Moutre, who's the chief economist for the National Association of Manufacturers. He serves there as NAM's economic forecaster and spokesperson on economic issues. He also leads the Center on Manufacturing Research and at the Manufacturing Institute, which is the social impact arm of NAM. We're also joined by Vaughn Tonquin-Livian, who's the CEO of Futuro Health. She's a national recognized leader on workforce development. She has most recently also served as the Executive Vice Chancellor of Workforce and Digital Futures at the California Community College System, which is the largest higher education system in the nation with 115 institutions. Thanks everyone for joining us today, and I'll turn it over to Bill now. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and welcome to our panel, our conversation. And I want to just jump right into it, as our time is really sparse or scarce. But I want you all to react or give me sort of your initial thoughts on Secretary Chang's remarks, which, as I agree with Stuart, were very helpful for me, seeing the framework and seeing their vision. Because for me, what I took away, or one of the things I took away, was it connects to some of my work I've been doing on what the United Nations calls human priorities investments not only in human capital, but also importantly social capital. So investments in social capital, so investing in communities, investing in community centers, investing in social safety nets, and that we've done this kind of type of deferred maintenance over the last few decades, which has made families, as she used the word resiliency, made it much more difficult for families to be resilient, and communities, that matter. So let me start with Chad. What are your takeaways from the Secretary's comments?
Well, I think it's important to note that workforce is a huge issue for manufacturers, and we've been working pretty closely with Secretary Raimondo on workforce issues. Certainly, that is a big issue for us, right, in terms of the ability to find workers, to be able to get the capacity to, demand is really strong right now, right, and workforce is certainly a big challenge. I think the other thing to note is manufacturing actually has seen a lot of job growth this year. We're almost 300,000 jobs have been created in manufacturing this year, which is the best since 1997. So I think there's a lot of good to be said out there about the job market, even with all of the challenges that we're going to be talking about in a second when we talk about the Great Resignation. But we don't want to lose sight of the good there as well, which is some pretty strong labor market activity kind of coming back from the pandemic.
Great, thank you, Vaughn. And then we'll go to Ed.
Thank you, Bill. I look at the large numbers staring back at us in the face, which is 10.9 million open jobs at a moment in time when we have 8.4 individuals who are unemployed. With that size of a challenge, what is important about her message to us is that none of us, no organization, no single institution can tackle this issue alone. And what I really appreciate about the EDA grants that are being issued, especially the Good Jobs one, is that it is calling for parties to come together in an ecosystem of the willing to collaborate and braid resources rather than start from scratch. And that's the kind of collective work that we need to do at full speed.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Ed, and then Maria.
Yeah, we have a lot in common with the administration. We certainly share their goals to get people back into the workforce. At the same time, we have a lot of concerns with some of the administration's priorities. For instance, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration's emergency temporary standard. We think it's going to cause a lot of people to leave the workforce. We don't think that's going to be particularly helpful. We're still trying to deal with the administration on that issue. We would like to see more immigration. We'd like to see more cooperation to providing us legal immigrants for our industry. Right now, our industry is short well over 1.1 million workers. Nationwide, there's 10 million open jobs. So clearly there's some sort of disconnect, and we want people back in the economy.
Great, thank you, Maria. Yeah.
Thanks, Bill. I think her remarks were a good reminder that caregiving challenges are still playing a huge role in the early post-pandemic recovery labor market right now. It was also exciting to hear the commitment of the Economic Development Administration to training and sector strategies. I think at the Heldrick Center, we think about economic development and workforce development as being one and the same. And I think it just bodes well to see that level of commitment coming from EDA.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to stick with you. And then pose the question, but it'll go to everybody. From your perspective, and the groups that you focus on, and the sectors that you focus on, what's behind this trend? What's behind this whole great resignation and long-term unemployment? Because particularly, during these times of plenty, now where we are, I mean, we still have a long way to go. So I say plenty in air quotes, but people who are long-term unemployed in previous recoveries or expansions, right, were viewed as being there's something wrong with you, right? That if you can't find a job or take a job and the unemployment rate is 4.8%. I know that's the average for the nation, and it's double for Blacks and people with no more than a high school degree, double the national number. But so let me really reel it back. And so, from your perspective, and then we'll go to everybody else, what's behind this trend or these set of patterns?
Yeah, generally high levels of resignations are a sign that workers feel confident enough to quit jobs because they know other jobs are out there, maybe jobs with better pay, more flexible hours, different jobs altogether. COVID clearly caused a lot of people to do some reassessing, to think about where, when, and how they want to work. We heard from Michelle, the October jobs report seemed to indicate that as the Delta becomes less of a factor and vaccination rates go up and schools and childcare situations get better, more people will go back to work. But I think one of the big questions in terms of the Great Resignation is whether people will be able to demand better quality jobs and benefits. Will the 1.5 million extra older workers who retired start to come back? And what does it mean for the long-term unemployed? I mean, we know from past recessions that there is a stigma attached to long-term unemployed job seekers. And when we're talking about older long-term unemployed job seekers, that stigma is doubled. I mean, there's no question that they face age discrimination as well as challenges by virtue of having been out of the labor market for a while.
Great, thank you. Ed, and then we'll go to Vaughn and then to Chad.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to what Maria said. I largely agree with it. I think there's no question that right now my members are looking for workers of all stripes. So we would love additional legal immigration. We would love older workers to come back into the economy. We would love workers who retired as carpenters or plumbers to go look at jobs at Lowe's, or we would love teachers to go look at jobs at Walmart or Target. We absolutely would love those. We are doing our best to provide flexible hours. If somebody wants a 2-hour shift, a few years ago, that might be not something that a retailer wasn't interested in. Now we will absolutely have that conversation. So we are doing our best. We have hiked wages just about across the board. Amazon increased its average starting wage in the United States to over $18 an hour. We're going to hire another 125 warehouse workers, 125,000, I should say, warehouse workers just from Amazon alone. So my members are eager to hire workers of all stripes.
Great, thank you. Vaughn, and then Chad.
Yeah, Bill, it's an extraordinary confusing times, especially for adults. If you look at the Strata Consumer Insights reports, which has done Gallup polls on adults, it's a moment in time where adults don't want to commit to degrees because they're not sure of where it would lead, but they're willing to skill up and to attain new skills. But it's also a moment in time when we have declining enrollment in higher education across the nation. In four-year colleges is roughly about 5%, and community colleges, which is surprising because it's a lower cost, more affordable tuition, it's been as dramatic as 11% decline across the board. So at a moment in time when adults need to skill in order to be more relevant to the labor market, they're also shying away from pursuing more education. And part of this is, and we have the pandemic, which adds to the hurdle of actually engaging in education. And many of us haven't actually taken coursework in an online format. So creating on-ramps that build their confidence into adult-friendly educational formats and delivery will be really key as we work to connect people with the right skills to the right jobs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Maria, I'll come to you and real quickly, but I would just want to respond to Vaughn, your use of the word confidence. People really don't, I think, underestimate or understate, right, the emotional impact that the pandemic has had on obviously families in terms of losing loved ones, but just even having to change their life approaches, and whether it be how they're parenting, how they're raising their children, how they're working with their older or elder parents, and then just how they're living and moving in their communities. And so that I hear compassion that is needed for many of these employees who want to come back. Maria, if I'm going to add Maria in here real quickly, and then we'll come to you, Chad.
Okay. In terms of older, long-term unemployed job seekers, one of the things that I wanted to highlight was the emotional impact. The sort of mental and physical health impacts of long-term unemployment can be just devastating. And we know that the under-resourced public workforce system really isn't set up to provide the kinds of support that these workers might need in order to reconnect to jobs in the labor market. At the Heldrick Center since 2015, with our New Start Career Network, and more recently with a job seeker community of practice, we've been experimenting with using volunteers to provide coaching, to help motivate job seekers, and also to provide them with access to wellness tools, yoga, share and support sessions, peer support activities, to really try and address the challenges beyond just talking about whether they have skills issues.
Great, thanks. I'm glad you put the plug in for yoga. I just got my certification to be an instructor, and I was and for those various reasons. So Chad, but before I go to you, Chad, I want to pose a question that wasn't on my script, but I think it's still important. But I want to put it out there and let you kind of ruminate on it a little bit. And it's a follow up to something Vaughn said too around she's confused. I'm confused for all the same reasons you said that, but I get my confusion also grows because we've seen, it seems like there's been an uptick in strikes, right? In union activity and strikes. How does that play into this conversation around the Great Resignation, around long-term unemployed? And Chad, if you want to take that, start answering that one, that would be great. But
Sure.
Please stay with the first question that was put out.
So, I mean, much like everyone else, I mean, manufacturers are struggling to find talent, right? Overall, there's 870,000 job openings right now, an all-time high. Quits are also an all-time high, much as they are for the larger economy. And to your point about strikes, I think in general, workers have leverage right now, right? We've seen wages in the manufacturing sector go up 5.1% for production workers over the last year, right? That's the most since 1982. To be fair, costs have actually gone up more than that. So real wages probably are negative, but you've seen a really strong growth in wages. We actually are doing a number of conversations with manufacturers right now. Almost all of them are telling me that they're having to raise wages to feel like they're staying competitive with the marketplace, the local marketplace. And so you're seeing this kind of increase in wages just to try to bring people off the sidelines as much as possible. As it relates to what we're doing with AARP, we have an aging workforce, right? And the challenge we continue to have in manufacturing is where is that next generation of worker coming from? Such that for the most part of the manufacturing sector, about a third of our members say that they don't want the older workers to leave, right? And so they're trying to find creative ways to keep them on board with part-time or phased retirement programs or mentorships or a whole host of things. This is certainly something that, at least for us, age is not really a factor. It's just we need bodies, right, to be able to meet the demand that we'll train whoever comes in the door, but we need people to actually come in and work, because that's really the biggest challenge that manufacturers have right now.
Mm-hmm. Ed, and then Maria, and then Vaughn. What are y'all's thoughts on on the strike and this increased strike activity? Is it adding to this confusion for me at least?
So there's about 158 million people in this country. A grand total of about 500,000 will go on strike this year. At the present time, there are probably somewhere around 18 to 20 significant strikes going on nationwide. I'm not really sure this is a huge factor in what we're talking about here. I think mainly these are limited situations. The John Deere situation, the UAW actually signed off on the contract that the John Deere workers eventually refused. So, I'm not sure this is playing into the situation significantly.
Great, thank you. Maria, Vaughn, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Striketober or Strikevember, I guess now the latest I heard was Strikesgiving. There clearly is some momentum as part of the Great Resignation, as part of workers feeling that they're looking for different and better conditions to work under. I think that's part of the big question with the Great Resignation. Is this some kind of permanent structural change where workers may have more leverage or not? I'd like to be a little optimistic on the side of workers having more leverage, but on the other hand, kind of along the lines of what Ed was saying, I mean, less than 11% of American workers are represented by unions, 6% in the private sector. Workers in the US have some of the weakest employment protections of any developed country. They're at-will workers. They can be fired with virtually no notice. We don't have great safety nets. So, whether workers really will end up showing more leverage, having more leverage after this, it's not clear.
Chad says, workers have leverage right now, but I believe it's a temporary moment, because it's not really. I mean, if you look at my father-in-law, who for 35 years worked with Boeing, they were able to provide him with healthcare benefits, retirement benefits, training and education along his career. Well, most of us now are highly uncoupled from our employment. I mean, the Department of Labor says we're less than 5 years with any one employer. So we really have to figure out how all of us as workers continue to build our skills. What type of organizational structure can we hook into for our health benefits and our retirement? In other countries like Singapore, they've created lifelong learning and training accounts that are much more portable benefits. The portability that moves with the employee or the worker is much more robust. And so I'd like to put out there that perhaps that our social infrastructure, or maybe our human infrastructure, hasn't quite caught up to the economy that is coming, where work becomes more fragmented and we cannot tie a lot of these assets into our employment, and they need to move along with us as workers.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, any sort of follow-ups to this you all wanted to possibly throw out? Okay. Yeah. For me, I think about, and Ed, I think your points are well taken. However, I think that there's a great deal of economic research, right, that has shown basically since like the early 1980s, right, that we've seen this growth in income inequality, and a large part of that growth in income inequality and insecurity, economic insecurity, is related to shifts in public policy, right? Shifts in supporting workers, right? Such as consistently raising the federal minimum wage. I mean, yes, we've seen minimum wage or real value wages for low wage workers prior to the pandemic did start to rise, but I think many attribute that to right now we have 32 states that have federal minimum wages have state minimum wages that are above the federal. So I wonder if when we were in grad school, we learned about the decision to strike, right? I mean, that's the last resort. It's really viewed as a last resort. And so I'm wondering if part of this, what we're seeing, right, is this great resignation, that the strike activity is really it's an aspect of the resignation, which I think Maria said, but dare I use the word, it's really that final chapter, is their extreme sort of response, but related to a set of historical, right, experiences that workers and their children or their parents and their grandparents have experienced. So
since you brought me up, I'd say I refer to Chad for a lot of the economics, but I'd say a couple things. Number one, you raised a number of issues. I'd say the unionization rate has been falling significantly pretty much since the Second World War. We didn't really officially have statistics on it until BLS started counting in 1983, but we can pretty much be sure that it spiked somewhere in the mid-50s and has been declining ever since. You raised 1980. I'd say that since 1980, the percentage of workers' comp, in other words, total workers' compensation, that goes to each and every employee, the percentage of which goes to his healthcare and benefits has greatly increased. So if you compare wages to, if you compare simple wages, I don't think you're seeing the whole picture. If you look at total compensation versus productivity, I think it gives a different picture. Again, Chad has probably forgotten more about this than I'll ever know, so I refer to him.
I mean, I think it's important to note that as I kind of said earlier, as I'm talking to manufacturers, they've had to raise their wages pretty significantly, and not union, non-union doesn't really matter. They're all raising wages pretty significantly this year, and there's expectations of raising wages pretty significantly next year, and they feel that they need to do so really to stay competitive with the labor market in their area. I do want to go in a little bit in a different direction, Bill. I know, sorry, Maria, I saw you want to say something, but I think one thing that has kind of got lost here is when you manufacturers, you look at the overall skills mismatch that's out there. Part of it is a perceptions challenge that we have, in which we're trying to change as much as we can. There's these opinions out there, or perceptions out there, that manufacturing is dark, dirty, and dangerous, right? And that's not really what it is at all anymore. So part of the challenge we have is getting people to think of us, right, to come in the door. The other one that I think is important to note is that We are not as mobile of a society as we think we are, right? There's might be job opportunities in Ohio, but I live in rural Illinois, which is where I'm from. And I don't want to move to Ohio. I don't want to move to Washington State or wherever, so I do think that we also have to recognize that mobility is sometimes an issue here. And that's true of all ages, that also sometimes I think can be important to kind of look at that overall picture of where the skills mismatches might be taking place.
Great. And Maria, if you could, I want to go with Maria, but respond to, I think, what you may have wanted to add, I think, or whatever you're going to say, but then we'll go down that path that Chad has gone in terms of, what do you see, or how are these mismatches playing out in the industries that you follow, or the sort of the sector or individuals or groups that you focused on?
Yeah. So I mean, I would say that I think for older workers, and especially older long-term unemployed workers, it's not so much a question of a skills gap, with the exception maybe of some digital literacy issues, but more of an opportunities gap. 3/4 of US employers and 99% of Fortune 500s use automated hiring software. And we know that nearly half reject job seekers with a gap of 6 months or longer, right? So those are people who put their resumes into some black hole and then never hear back, regardless of what kind of skills that they have. We also know that from the last recession, there were a lot of older workers with IT backgrounds who then got the latest IT credentials, high demand skills, and then employers would say, well, we can't hire them because they don't have experience using those skills. At least allegedly, that was the reason for them to not get hired. So I don't think that training alone is a panacea for older workers. I really think we have to address some of the other hiring challenges. Aside from that, older workers tend to have less access both to publicly funded training as well as employer provided training.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, Vaughn, and then we'll go to Ed.
Yeah, I'd love to build up on this point that was made about kind of geographies. And here's one workforce where we want to make sure, everyone of us wants to make sure we have our proportional share in our own backyard, and it's the healthcare workforce. So there's several things going on, not only the burnout that is predictable from the pandemic and indicative of the Great Resignation, but the pandemic taught us how quickly skills shift overnight. The act that we had to all stay at home and shelter in place cut over healthcare from in-person to telehealth and telemedicine. So all of a sudden, now all of these practitioners who are working with patients now have to learn virtual rooming and the technology and the troubleshooting of technology that is associated with that. And that shifted their skill sets because consumers began to love it and don't want to revert back to the prior way of delivery. In addition, this pandemic also created new needs. For example, the aftermath of the pandemic will be the crisis of mental health and behavioral health issues, which creates a whole new workforce that is needed, that is not out there. So there's a lot of shifts, and being able to move at the speed of need is going to be really important. And thinking through systematically, how do we collectively together, rather than competing institutions within our own backyard, how do we coordinate and braid efforts so that we have an ecosystem that is cranking out the needed labor force? It's going to take all of us.
Yeah. And as you said, I agree with you that there's a whole set of new issues, new concerns that have emerged. I mean, I'm in the middle of reading Angus Deaton and Ann Case's book, The Deaths of Despair. And that's another example where the pandemic, I think, has really heightened the mental health crisis that we were having prior to the pandemic. So thank you for raising that. And I hope more people will expand the work that's being done in that area. Ed, did you want to share a little bit about, from your perspective, retail perspective, in terms of how this mismatch is playing out in your industry?
I would say I'd say there's a number of different factors for us. I would say for, as far as, where we are in terms of starting wages, right now, Costco, more than half their US employees make more than $25 an hour. For Walmart, their average wage for frontline workers is now $16.40. Meanwhile, the conversation in Washington is whether or not to raise the minimum wage off of $7. Really, it's the minimum wage discussion is so incredibly divorced from what my members are facing. More than anything else right now, my members are eager to provide goods and services. We're going into a crucial time of year for the retail industry. I mentioned legal immigration a few times. The Trump administration and the Bush and the Biden administration have nothing in common on any political issue, except for the fact they both do not like legal immigration. We have not been able to get those numbers up in either of the administrations, and it's been a real challenge. And so I'd say that's a consideration. The administration right now is imposing this Occupational Safety and Health Administration vaccine mandate at exactly the wrong time. According to Goldman Sachs, 9% of workers across the board are going to walk off their jobs rather than take the vaccine. Now, maybe it's less, maybe it's more, but my expectation is with regard to my workforce, retail workforce, which is largely younger, which is largely an unvaxxed population. I would say that 9% is going to be increasingly high for my members. And then there's a geographic element, right? So the Mountain West and the South are going to have more unvaccinated workers, and therefore it's going to be harder for us to hire in those locations. So those are some of the things we consider.
Yeah, if I can probe on, thank you for sharing. Those are great talking points, but there's real substance behind it. And I guess I wanted to either, we haven't had enough time, so I'll choose on one of them. I want to ask you what is the narrative, or the winning narrative, or the narrative around, right, that you all talk about for why we need to have, you'd said, why we need to address immigration from a workforce standpoint. What's and even broader economic standpoint? What's the narrative for y'all's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no question that this country was built by immigrants, and we have to continue bringing them in legally. My members are poised to hire Italians and Irish, and Liberians and Vietnamese. We would like to bring those workers in legally. Right now, throughout the Trump administration, despite all the rhetoric, illegal immigration didn't move at all. Both visa overstaying and border crossings continue to occur. But my members want to participate in immigration policies legally. J1 program, which brings immigrants into largely tourist areas, has been basically cut off by both administrations. Right, so if you have a Eastern European kid who wants to come work at a ski resort or be a lifeguard in Myrtle Beach, those programs are closed down right now. That's another American that needs to do that job. And it's been hitting tourist areas over the summer. It's not going to be remedied here by the winter, so it's going to affect those tourist areas which are more popular in the wintertime. Again, so that's just the J1 program. We don't have enough H2Bs, right? So the H2B program right now, it's limited at 66,000 workers nationwide. It's not nearly enough. The market demand is 2 or 3 times that. High skilled workers, H1Bs. We would love to bring Indians, Pakistanis over to this country to participate in our economy, to raise their families here. Right now, there's legislation largely supported by the House Democrats that would allow H1B children to stay here. We would love that legislation to go through. So again, my workers are ready. My members are ready and willing to hire workers of all these terms.
Great, thank you. So it looks like we're about to come up on time. We're, I think, about 4 or 5 minutes left. So what I want to do is I want to ask the last question, but I'm going to ask a question. The last question will be for everybody. But after that, after your answer, or after everybody answers this last question, the group did not know they were going to get asked this question. But what I want you to do is to think about well, there's this term great resignation. What does it mean to you in one word though? Okay. What does great resignation mean to you in one word? And so those who watch Screen Actors Guild, you know that I've grabbed this from that. That's one of my favorite shows. But the bigger question around going forward, looking towards the future, is how will hiring evolve and change related to your specific industries? What policies, and we've talked a little bit about things, and Ed just shared his perspective. But what policies, government supports, or systems are necessary to build a more resilient labor market for the 21st century? Why don't we start with, we'll go Vaughn and then to Chad, Ed, and then Maria.
I was hoping to go second there, but I think the key word is resilient. The ability to be agile and shift as the labor market shifts, have policies where people can continually acquire new skill and remove the friction that adults may have in terms of being able to acquire those skills, whether they're financing or their supports, whether other, childcare, et cetera. I think we're going to have a new norm in this country where it is the expectation that we go back to the well of skilling and reskilling and upskilling constantly, rather than just doing it up front in our lifetime, and have our public policies mimic that.
Okay, great, thank you. We'll come back to you for your one word. So, who's up next?
Well, I'm next. My one word was churn, because when I'm an economist, so when I think of all the quits out there, kind of like Maria said, I think of people don't quit their job when they're worried about the economy, and I think the fact that we're seeing so many quits is a sign of health, actually, I would argue, in the economy. When I think of where we're going, so something like the manufacturing sector, manufacturing just is going to continue to get more technologically advanced over the next few years. And so kind of digging off of Vaughn's comment, that means more training, it means more upskilling, it means hiring people with a higher skill set, but also the existing workforce needs to continue to be upskilled as well. And so I think the future for manufacturing is bright, but it's different. It's going to be different than what we think of it today.
I think
And my word is challenge. I think.
I'm sorry, Ed. Yeah, gotcha. Thank you, Ed. You said what now? What is your word?
I'm sorry, Chad. I didn't mean to cut you off, Chad. Anyway, yeah, no, my word is challenge. I think for employers, we have to step up to the challenge, whether it's increasing flexible work arrangements, whether it's providing increased starting wages, signing bonuses. And it just can't be money. We need to make sure we provide a workplace that's safe and welcoming and diverse, and a place that workers could go. And I think my members are doing that. So it's definitely a challenge, but I think both my members and Chad's members are stepping up and doing our best.
Great, thank you. So Maria, are you going to keep this alliteration going of churn, challenge? We get another.
My word is going to be hope, but before we get to that, in terms of 21st century resilient labor market, I think we need to think about some ways to build in more tripartite structures. We don't have a history of that really, although there was once at the US Department of Labor, a Bureau of Labor Management Relations and Cooperative Programs. I think we need to look at ways to build in labor management cooperation to increase worker voice in decision-making and on the shop floor, and in terms of how to avoid layoffs or deal with layoffs if you can't avoid them. So I'm going to put a plug in for increasing labor management cooperation. I also wanted to mention that in New Jersey, we are getting ready to launch a lifelong learning account program. I know there have been a few examples around the country. None have had a lot of sticking power, but we'll see if we can do it better in Jersey. And I wanted to mention that in Vermont, they recently launched a returnship program geared toward experienced workers, helping them get access to some subsidized employment opportunities. And for Chad, if I may, anytime, I know we were trying to think of examples of apprenticeships for older workers. I'd be happy on behalf of the Heldrick Center to coordinate with the Manufacturers Association to see if we can do some research on older worker apprenticeship opportunities. So.
Great. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Chad. Thank you, Vaughn. Thank you, Ed. Awesome conversation. Thrilled to have led it. I think your 4 words that you all collectively put together as individuals, but I think they do come together as one, that as Chad said, churn, that we are in a moment where after 18 months of hell for many people, just to put it bluntly, with that we are seeing this churn, and we're all still continuing to face challenges. And the hope, as Maria said, is that we're collectively working together such that families and communities can be resilient. So, Susan Stewart, I turn it back to you now. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I will just very briefly thank the panel again and thank all of our attendees and thank AARP and our colleagues like Susan and Colin and Rhett at Public-Private Strategies who have helped us pull this together today. And I'll just turn it over to Susan. But thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Stuart, and thanks to everybody. This was a really interesting discussion, and we are so here at ARP so thrilled to be able to have these kind of conversations and to look further at these issues and how they impact employment. I'll just make a quick plug for a new platform we just put out that looks at the future of work and its impact on older workers. And we're looking at 5 megatrends. If you go to arp.org/megatrends, and a bunch of them were raised today: income inequality, lifelong learning, AI and technology, longevity, and sort of the erosion of the employer-employee contract. So it's fascinating that all of you raised each of these, and we just put up this platform, and we're going to be adding to it with different voices and different opinions about each of these. So anyway, thank you to all of you for such a really enlightening conversation, and I will turn it back to Rhett.
Wonderful. Well, I will close up with the logistics, but thank you, Susan and Stuart, for your leadership, and Bill, Ed, Chad, Vaughn, Maria, Colin, and a lot of people behind the scenes who've been working on this series, who folks didn't see on the screen today. But thank you all. There are lots of places you could be. This is a critical issue at a critical moment. We are so thrilled to be able to bring together so many practitioners and policymakers and thought leaders who are trying to figure out these critical issues as we come out of COVID-19 and we all work towards building back together. So with that, thank you for spending your mornings or afternoons or maybe your evenings, depending on where you are with us. We'll be following up with a link to this recording as well as some of the resources that Susan and the Fed team talked about. Thank you all so much for your time, and we'll talk soon. Have a great day.